Welcome to another Thoughts at Scale. Let's see, I took off last week. Actually didn't have Thoughts of Scale for a couple personal reasons, and then uh, Thanksgiving is coming up here shortly. Yeah, the holidays are going to start to interrupt these as well. But I will try and keep them as consistent as possible. This week, we're going to be talking a little bit about multi-channel communications and ways to think about, really getting your message out there. And I feel like I've got some great resources again for anybody that's considering, like, how do you best communicate with a team and think about, the ways that you're getting your messages out there. One of the things that I've talked a lot to people about, even going live on LinkedIn, is that the audience is here, and you don't have to do anything additional. You don't have to log into another tool or whatever. You don't have to track another calendar invite or anything else. And hopefully that makes it easier on people to get the messages essentially that I have, and also hopefully provides a little bit of value for people that are attending these sessions as well. The same thing holds true though for people that are trying to communicate anywhere inside of an organization. You're having to try and break through all the noise. One of the conversations that I had earlier this week was on maintaining focus in a team that's growing has become a greater and greater challenge for a particular leader. And he expressed just this ongoing need to try and figure out a way to make sure that he maintains direct communication with his team, in addition to, trying other modalities to get the message out there. And certainly video, images, spoken word directly to people in town halls and things like that are all, great ways to continue to communicate. But also there are people who primarily get most of their communication via written communication. And so, whether it be email or newsletters or, what have you, from a corporate perspective, these are things that we all need to be considering, which really brings me, more or less into the first point for the topic today, which is that, from a multi-channel communication standpoint, the George Bernard Shaw had made this statement previously that the single biggest problem in communications is the illusion that it's taken place. And it is so true that oftentimes we think that we're communicating. And one of the things that's been said to me, routinely from an adult education standpoint, is that the point where you become a bit worn out saying the same thing is the moment where people are just starting to understand what it is that you're talking about. And so, having to be repetitive and having to, continue to tell people the same thing repeatedly isn't necessarily because you're a poor communicator. It has to do with, there are two sides to this. There's the sending side and there's the receiving side. And if you're on that receiving side, maybe there are other things that are constantly pulling at you. Another statistic that I read in there's this book called Smart Brevity. And in Smart Brevity, the author talks about this idea that a great majority of the individuals that are in meetings oftentimes are just disconnected from what's going on in the meeting as well. And so knowing that, people may or may not be tuned into the things that are being discussed is really important. And it also is very important whenever you start to think about, how you're communicating, within your organization, also. And so, that just really, rang true for me, that I needed to also consider, where are people and, how to best communicate inside the organization. And I would imagine the same thing is true for a lot of individuals as they think about communicating in the organization. So the key questions here are, whenever you communicate, how do you communicate whenever you have big events that are going on inside of your organization? If you have, things that are coming up that people should be aware of. I know for many growing organizations, it could be things like, hey, look, there's this major milestone that's coming, and everybody should be aware of it. Also, just in terms of, standard news and what's going on in the organization, how do you communicate what's going on inside the organization? Then lastly, what do you really want people to pay attention to? So having a way to really, focus people and keep them, so that they're focused on the right milestones at a key point in time is also really critical. And in our current environment, there are a lot of different ways that we can communicate today. So whenever you think about, the channels that there are that you can communicate through, it could be things like, maybe maybe you need to communicate certain things in person. Maybe there's things that need to be carried out one-on-one, but also you got to have larger town halls or ways to communicate things that way. Email communication oftentimes is one of the defaults. Oftentimes many of us don't know and don't particularly have a good way of bringing together an extremely large team to try and get them all in the room at the same point in time. And so one way to, broadcast out, these types of communication could be email. Having internal presentations. So I mentioned town halls. You also could have, leader to leader presentations that happen. Webinars, whenever you start to think about both the internal side as well as the external side. I mean, we've all frequently had, larger Zoom meetings and things like that. So, webinars or Zoom meetings or, other virtual meetings, could be a way to, again, get out the message. For external communications, it could be social media. So again, it could be, LinkedIn messaging or even beyond. I routinely now, because of the digital media marketing company that I lead, I routinely am getting press releases as well, just as a natural chain of events. One of the interesting things, and this kind of goes back to the smart brevity message, just a moment ago, if you go to a standard press release and let's say if you lined up 5 or 10 of them next to each other, they all start to look exactly the same. And so how are you capturing somebody's attention with a press release to really make sure that the message that you're sending is something that people are receiving on the other end as well? And it's an interesting thing because I know that, PR organizations are paid a lot of money to make sure that they get out these press releases. And there's plenty of ways that, newspapers and the video media and things like that will pick up press releases. But I also think that, from a recipient standpoint, they all seem to look exactly the same. They don't necessarily grab the eye, if you will, and they also are oftentimes written in a similar fashion. And so I just kind of question how many press releases that go out aren't really valued in the industry because of the fact that the person receiving it more or less just says, look, this looks like everything else that I receive. If you look at other ways that you can, as well get out your message, certainly content marketing. So leveraging different platforms and paying for ads is what this is talking about. So paying for ads to get the message out is another way, certainly to get communication out. Press releases I mentioned a minute ago, and then lastly, newsletters. So these newsletters could be internal corporate, newsletters, or they could also be, other newsletters as well that go out to a broader audience. I know I normally get for the different startups that I oftentimes engage with. There are organizations that send out routine newsletters, which are nice because they sort of update you on the progress of the particular company. And again, it gives you a channel if you're on the sending side, having a company newsletter, you could have something, that routinely highlights people and pays attention to the work that is going on. Some of the reasons why you should, use multi-channel communications. I've touched on a few of these as I've gone through here, but to just come back just a little bit, if you have routine updates, certainly emails, those are things that we normally get. Many companies have an internal intranet as well. And if you don't have like an internal, let's say, web page, where people go, certainly Slack and their Teams sites and things like that, where you can, place these updates. And I've actually been, part of a larger PMO organization routinely where they put all the project information in one central location where it essentially becomes the repository for the project, but it also announces key milestones for the project as it's going on as well. And so keeping, again, these communications going is critical in terms of making sure that people understand what sort of updates are happening. And it's a great way to have business reviews and drive the traffic again back to, some of these places where the repository happens. And Teams has a great way to leverage that as well. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a great, it's just a great resource, for those of you who use Microsoft Teams in your organization. But, I certainly know of other ways that you can, have, again, a central repository for documentation using some of the other products that are out there as well. Communicating during big events could be things like, webinars and virtual meetings. I mentioned that just a little bit ago. I think that when people think about having a webinar, obviously it's a bigger sort of event, but it could be used for, Q&A sessions, or it could be used for actually, getting immediate engagement with people and having people, interact directly, with your leadership as well. And so, it's a great way to sort of, get messages out, but also have the ability to have a loop back and having that direct interaction. Social media, doesn't always provide that same level of engagement, right? So, it's a bit of a different level of communication. And then whenever I come down to like internal presentations and newsletters, these are more from a most organization standpoint, more formal ways of having these communications. And then you could have, things like, direct communications with clients or individuals inside of your company. And then you could have internal memos or training and workshops just to get, your message across. Now, oftentimes in many companies, as they grow, the first thing that sort of happens is that everybody is so heads down on what's going on. They're not necessarily paying attention to how do we make sure that the message about this goes out. And one of the things that I've tried to work with clients of ours on is things that are more in line, with things that you're working on are a lot easier to communicate versus creating another thing. And so, if you turn something into a presentation or a newsletter, you should always think about, are there ways to reuse things that we already have or already have to create to then leverage that in our communication. Also, what this particular session is mostly about is not just using one mode of communication all the time. So, let's say you overuse email, maybe there's another option to convert some of that to a once a week newsletter that goes out and updates everybody all at once, instead of having lots of little communications that go out all the time. And I've seen this before in organizations, both successfully as well as, very unsuccessfully, where, people just overuse email, and all of a sudden you wind up with hundreds of emails every day, rather than having one update that really updates everybody once a week in terms of what's transpired, because that's all that's really needed is to update, kind of the broader organization on that level of communication. And that could be done, again, via email, but instead of sending out, 40 or 50 updates, you could send out one, and it could contain everybody's updates for the entire organization in that one newsletter. So a real opportunity that way to think about, how to progress and involve people using a different form of communication, but also rather than, just communicating that one way, maybe you also have a repository where it's a place for people to go. That's a second form of communication. Then you also could have, routine business updates, and that could be, a third level. And so thinking about having multiple levels of communication where you're communicating kind of the same information, but you're also updating people as you progress with that, so that it's inclusive of where you currently are as an organization. And so having that, somewhat cutting across each one of these different areas, what are different ways that we could leverage the different levels of communication inside of the organization, is a real opportunity for organization as well. I think this other idea that came up in the brainstorming of, sort of what are methods of client communications, again, you may have a lot of direct one-on-one communication with your clients, but you may also want to think about, ways to have things like a client portal where they can go and essentially, extract the information and updates as well as you go along, so that you're not always just sending out updates via email or doing updates, via direct sessions, for projects and things like that. There is an opportunity to create a client portal that essentially could become your bilateral way of carrying out communications as well. And I've seen this done very successfully as well with some of the current tools that we have. And again, I would reference Teams, but I mean, there are lots of other, ways that you could use, other collaboration tools to say, hey, look, this is our repository and we're going to post things here. We would like for you to post things as well. And then that way, it becomes our way to communicate back and forth, across both organizations. So whenever you think about the different levels of communication, I've somewhat, again, touched on these just a moment ago, but there are a few of these that, as I was thinking through, I wanted to sort of bring up as well. I've seen print signs work extremely well, especially whenever you're in a regulated environment where you need people to routinely be able to reference the same thing over and over again. I remember, with certain audits, we had, on the back of our badges, like the company mission and vision statement. We had, some of the key quality goals, would be listed on a particular, plastic badge that essentially went on our lanyards that, became the way, of having a quick reference if you needed something that maybe most people might not need every moment of every day. But if you ever needed to reference it, it was there. It was available, routinely on print signs on the wall, but also, in other printed media that we had, like these cards that went along with our ID badges. And so, that certainly is another way to think about more long-term things that need to, be sustained throughout the organization as it moves forward. I mentioned a minute ago, team collaboration, having things like Notion, Asana, Trello. We're in Notion right now. I mean, that's what this presentation more or less has been built in. I oftentimes use this. It's interesting to me, and I, for many reasons, can't show you everything that I have built out in Notion, but it's interesting to me how many people do get to see on calls some of the things that I've built out. In terms of having standard procedures for people that help my organization, or, having common reference documents in one place. I was recently in a class, and during that class, there were common links that were coming up in our conversations. And so I just started storing all of those common links in one place. And again, it was a great, way to leverage, having that available. And anytime that somebody asked for it, I could send out the link, which, anybody that's currently subscribed to Thoughts at Scale, may as well just quickly mention how you would do that. So you would go to thescalingmethod.com/thoughts at scale, and you can subscribe there. And essentially what you get are not only reminders about these sessions, but you also get the things that I cover. And so essentially with this one, you will get a Notion database that has everything that I cover in here. And I'll talk a little bit more about the reference materials as well, that will come with that. But it's, to me, Notion is a great way to collaborate, because you can have other people assigned to your same database, and those individuals then can come in and add things or remove things. With that, it can always be up to date. There are other tools where I've seen before, and if you think back to some of the earlier, ways to have a common portal, you could probably, think of how this would happen. But because there was always one individual that was responsible for all of the updates, things oftentimes would fall out of sync. And that moment that you start to fall out of sync and people stop using the tool, all of a sudden it becomes less valuable from that standpoint. And so to me, that's where, Notion is valuable, and some of these other, tools, frankly, are as well. And I really, I keep referencing Teams because I feel like they've really done it well, and they've created a tool that essentially isn't, updated once and then, goes off into the dust. It could be something that forever lives with a project or an organization that's trying to grow, their roles and responsibilities documents and grow their scalability, overall, and have, common metrics in one place and things like that. And to me, Teams does it well. So does Notion. These are two, one free and one is paid, but they're both great tools. Town halls. I mentioned some of this a little bit ago, but the addressing employee concerns and having a discussion, overall, I feel like is the best opportunity whenever it comes to town halls. Now, I've seen these rushed in the past where you'll have a leader that's very busy. They come in, they hold a town hall, they don't take time for Q&A. And I feel like it devalues a bit of the opportunity, but there is a real opportunity to have Q&A sessions and have a discussion about, how things could be, streamlined in the organization, or, how, one group could be communicated to all at once, and just make sure that, that things are carried forward. I also would highly encourage, for anybody that's doing town halls in their organization, videotape them. Videotape them, because there probably will be somebody that can't make it. And it's easy enough now to pull out your smartphone and, have a way to record something like this really quickly. And your phone could certainly do a great job at initially capturing it, and then place that video somewhere where it could be watched. Now, if it's something that you're wanting to keep private, there are plenty of ways to do that as well. And YouTube is one thing that I certainly use, where they store all of my videos, and then I have both private and unlisted videos as well. So, an unlisted video, you're not going to get to it unless somebody has the link. And so in that essence, you could keep things, closer within the organization. Now, it won't prevent it from going outside of an organization. And I would be careful about that if you're sharing things that need to remain private, that those things are either brought up at a section where they could be edited off, or maybe, there's an opportunity to go create a more private video channel as well. And there's, services for that also. But I would highly encourage, don't just hold the town hall, recorded as well, so that it can be saved and play back, for anybody that happened to miss it, couldn't be there as well. I'm going to skip through a few of these. As I said, these are available for anybody that's subscribed to Thoughts at Scale. But certainly this is a resource for anybody that's thinking about communications and what way should we consider both as a channel, and then lastly, what are potential ways that success might look like as well. And so as a part of this, you won't be able to edit the direct database that I have, but if you import this into yours, you could certainly edit this and then change any of these values for things that you would actually use in your organization. And so I would highly recommend that. The last thing I wanted to cover is a tool that I've created at the very bottom. So if you sort of scroll through this, I'm just kind of slowly scroll through just so that everybody can get to see this. But essentially the tool here is, you could think about whatever message that it is that you're needing to communicate. Maybe you need routine project updates. Those could be done via, business reviews. We could do, something, where you have a level of communication at town halls. And then there's an area here for status. These channels are all of the ways that you could potentially consider. And again, certainly you can add more to this tool. So you could think about, the different channels that you want to go through and communicate. And then in terms of the status, we want to, possibly say, that it's either not started, in progress, or done. What date did we start the particular communication? Was it released or not? And then any sort of files or media. So oftentimes, you might have a Google Doc, a presentation, Word doc. Any of those might also be needed as you think about the communication as it's released. But I was thinking that, this might be a good way for a company that maybe doesn't have a tool like this, where you could get started with, it's something like Notion inside of your organization, and might actually benefit you in terms of thinking about the messaging and communication. And so hopefully this is a good resource for anybody that needs it. And again, it's available all you have to do is be a subscriber of Thoughts at Scale, and then I'll send out the links later this week. So just to wrap us up here, I just wanted to make a couple final statements. I want to kind of come back to where we started in terms of communication. Because you're saying things doesn't necessarily mean that the message is being received. And so you want to make sure that you routinely come back to things and repeat things so that eventually they start to sink in terms of what is the value for me, and then also where should I really be paying attention to this particular communication. The second part is using multiple ways. We all are different as human beings, and using multiple methods of communication are absolutely critical. And so thinking about, how do I use all of the different ways that are out there? And one of the interesting things, so I'll just talk about, myself and podcasts and some of the things that I personally do. There are a lot of great interviews that have been held on my podcast, Life Science Success. I also feel like there are a lot of podcasts they're initially listened to by the core audience that listens to each one of the podcasts that come out. The other people that would benefit from that message, though, oftentimes there are levels where those individuals may or may not necessarily, listen to a particular episode. So for that reason, there are plenty of communications that I send out to people who are podcast guests in terms of, things that we're thinking about doing to try and get the message out, and that they should also be considering in terms of involving the employees in an organization, involving, people that, might actually benefit from it, that are in their LinkedIn network or in their broader personal network. Even more than that, having a way to just break down the message and make it shorter is so critical. And so whenever I think about even these sessions and having them, 30 minutes rapid fire and carrying it out, it's a great benefit as well, hopefully to a lot of people in terms of just being able to watch or listen to the message that's here. So thanks a lot for being here. I really appreciate it. And hopefully this has been a benefit to you. Please go and subscribe to the Thoughts at Scale as well. And I look forward to seeing you in future sessions.